prior to this experience that you're talking about, had in your life there been anything? I mean, I guess you describe as paranormal. Anything that you had, thought would, even if you didn't put a kind of
Right.
alien or anything
Right. Yeah.
name to it?
Yeah. Prior to that, I'd had two experiences in my life that I couldn't explain. One of them, I was coming back from a fishing trip with my dad and my grandfather. I was about 8. My grandfather's car had a sunroof, and at night we're driving, and I saw a fireball up in the sky, sort of doing like a figure eight, following the car. And I tried to get my dad's attention, and he was sort of like switched off. He what? No response. My grandfather and my father would just drove like zombies down the road as I'm in the back seat going, "Hey, hey, guys, Dad, check it out. Do you see
Wow.
this?" So that's a memory. It's so long ago that I can't definitively put that in the reality basket. So
Right? No, I get
Yeah.
it.
it's an unknown, right?
Yeah.
The other experience I had was not anything to do with UFOs, but my dad and I were fishing in Pretty Boy Lake, which is in Maryland. There's a lake called Pretty Boy. It's really isolated. My dad's a huge hunter and a fisherman. He used to drag me out, wake me up at 4 o'clock in the morning to go spend the day on the river. He liked nothing more to do that. But as a kid, after like 20 minutes, I'm like dying to get the hell out of there, and I started hunting for bugs. But we were actually hunting. We were fishing for crawdads, crayfish. We'd take a string, and you'd tie chicken to the string, throw it out in the water, wait about half an hour, shine a flashlight on it, and the whole thing would be crawling with
Oh,
blood.
that's cool.
Oh,
You
really?
scoop it up. My mom would boil them up and then make scampi, like shrimp scampi, but with crawdads.
Sounds awesome.
One of the
Hmm.
best things. I mean, it's like the
Love that.
greatest. My mother's crawdad scampi is one of the great highlights of my childhood.
That you guys caught. I love that. That's so cool.
So we were out there fishing Pretty Boy Lake, and across the lake, the lake is really big, but down the shore, about a couple of 100 yards, maybe 300 yards, 200 yards, pretty far away, we hear this guttural screaming going on. At first, we think it's a man. He must be being killed.
Jesus.
But as it went on, it was not a man. It was way too deep. It went on for way too long, and it sounded really pissed off. And me and my dad are looking at each other. It had just gotten dark. Crayfish is a nighttime sport, so it was night. And my dad is 6'3", and he's a Vietnam vet, and he's been in the woods his whole life. And I'm looking at my dad. If this guy freaks out, I know something's up, and like, we have something to worry about. My dad looks up, and across the lake, this roaring scream came again, and then the trees started to shake, and that you could hear the cracking of the trees, right? And then that cracking started coming toward us.
Yeah.
My dad grabbed. I was probably, what was I, 9 or 10 years old. My dad grabbed me under his arm, picked up his stuff, and ran to the Jeep, which was quite a ways away from the lake. And that was terrifying. I've never been so scared in my life before or since.
How old were
Yeah.
you?
That sounds amazing.
I was young enough that he could literally lift me up and carry me under his arm for hundreds of yards back to the Jeep. So I must have been 8, 9 years old, something like that. 10, maybe 10.
That
Um,
Yeah.
is wild. Did you and your dad ever talk about what the
oh, we
F
do, yeah.
that
Every
was?
every now and then it's one of the family stories that we
Yeah.
retell every now and then around the dinner table.
But you didn't stay long enough to see what was coming out of those woods.
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
Those trees were not little trees, and they started shaking and then breaking, and you heard the
Yeah.
cracking of the wood across there, and then it started coming toward us, and we weren't sticking
Wow.
around. It
Yes,
was
there's some
Yeah,
paranormal
that's
stuff.
inexplicable. I
Yeah,
mean, I remember being my wife and I went to Belize, and we had never heard howler monkeys, and
right.
and we were just not prepared. We were city folk, and we didn't know anything that was going on. But that's kind of what it made me think of. It was like, and of course, not a lot of howler monkeys in Maryland, and it sounded like a lot bigger, but it yeah, that's a terrifying sound.
yeah. Well,
My dad, in the being a hunter and a fisherman since the time he could crawl,
yeah.
has heard and seen just about everything there is to hear and see in the woods.
Now, does
Yeah.
Maryland have any sort of legends, like cryptid legends, like anything like a Sasquatch or the New Jersey Devil, that sort of thing?
Right? Yeah, the Sasquatch is pretty darn prevalent, all across, certainly the West Coast and the northern West Coast, but also you find, you find them down in Florida. They call them, what do they call them? Swamp something.
Hmm.
And yeah, they sort of, their stomping ground sort of creeps around in that area. Not as prevalent as other places, but certainly not unheard of.
Yeah,
And this was back in this would have been the late 70s. So a lot less, developed as it would be today. I mean,
yeah,
you could get out there, a lot of country roads and a lot of places that, you had to drive a couple hours to get into, and there was absolutely nothing around.
yeah.
That's where we were, Pretty Boy Lake.
Yeah, we grew
Well,
up in Pennsylvania, kind of country, and
Yeah.
I truly felt assailed by the unknown in that, when it wasn't it we had a house that had a lot of activity. Of course, I lived in terror of Bigfoot. I mean, that just In Search Of episode with Leonard Nimoy when it
Oh
just
my God, the best.
showing up at the cabin, and you're like, Bigfoot just shows up at the door, knocks at the cabin. It's like, I'm never fucking going camp. I'm never going to any cabin. It was, but it
In
sounds like
search of, yeah.
you had a very legit
Yeah.
Sasquatch encounter, and what's again so just puzzling about all this